Some moments don't just change your life, they crack it wide open, and everything you've been holding inside spills out onto the floor for everyone to see. Mine happened on a rooftop in Manhattan, surrounded by people who smelled like expensive cologne and smiled like they meant it. My name is Carol, and I want to tell you about the night my family's carefully constructed world came apart at the seams. But to understand what happened on that rooftop, you need to understand what it feels like to grow up invisible inside your own home. Let me set the scene first. My sister Lily's engagement party. The Grand Harbor Hotel, one of those places where even the air feels like it costs money. The rooftop terrace was dripping with glass lanterns that threw this warm, honeyed light across everything, making everyone look softer and kinder than they actually were. A jazz trio was tucked into the corner, playing something smooth and forgettable, the kind of music rich people use as background noise while they network. Waiters floated between tables carrying champagne on silver trays. Every detail had been curated. Every guest had been vetted. It was the kind of evening my family lived for, polished, perfect, and completely performative. My father, Henry, stood up near the head of the table, champagne flute raised. That smile on his face. God, I knew that smile. It was his public smile, the one he wore like a pressed suit. It never reached his eyes, but it didn't need to. It was designed for boardrooms and cocktail parties, and tonight, it was aimed squarely at his golden girl. "To our successful daughter," he said, his voice carrying across the terrace like he was delivering a keynote. "Our pride and joy." He was looking at Lily. Of course he was looking at Lily. Then, and this is the part that still makes my chest tight, he turned to me. Slowly, like an afterthought, like someone remembering they left the stove on. And with this little smirk, this cruel little curve of his mouth, he said, "And you, still with that poor mechanic?" A few people laughed, nervous, uncomfortable laughs. The kind people give when they know something ugly just happened but they don't want to make it awkward. I felt it land in my stomach like a stone dropped into still water. But here's the thing about being humiliated by someone your whole life. You get good at pretending it doesn't hurt. Olympic-level good. So I kept my eyes on my plate, kept cutting my steak into small, precise pieces, kept breathing like my lungs weren't on fire. I even smiled a little because that's what daughters like me learn to do. You smile, you shrink, you survive. Jake, my boyfriend, the poor mechanic, was sitting beside me. Not at the main table, of course. We'd been placed near the service entrance, close enough to hear the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. That was deliberate. Everything in my family was deliberate. My parents had spent 18 months treating Jake like something stuck to the bottom of their shoe, and they hadn't bothered to ask him a single real question about his life. Not one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back further. Let me show you the house I grew up in, not the physical one, though that was grand enough, a brownstone on the Upper East Side with rooms we never even used. I mean the emotional house, the one with locked doors and walls so thick that no amount of screaming could penetrate them. My father built his empire from ambition and concrete. Henry Real Estate Group. Luxury apartments, commercial towers, developments that reshaped entire neighborhoods. He was the kind of man whose name appeared in business magazines and whose handshake could make or break a deal. My mother, Elizabeth, was his perfect counterpart, a socialite who chaired charity galas and sat on boards and wore her philanthropy like a designer label. Together, they were a power couple. Separately, they were two people who measured love in accomplishments, and then there were their daughters. Lily was 3 years older than me, and from the moment she could talk, she spoke their language. Business, strategy, ambition. By 32, she was a vice president at my father's company, closing deals and charming investors like she'd been born for it, and maybe she had been. She was sharp, polished, and knew exactly how to play the game. Our parents adored her. Not just loved her, adored her. The way people adore trophies they've spent years polishing. Me? I was an art teacher at a public school in the Bronx. I'll let that sink in for a second because it sank into my parents like a slow poison. I made $62,000 a year. I spent a chunk of that buying paintbrushes and sketch pads for kids whose families couldn't afford them. I showed up every morning to a building with flickering hallway lights and broken radiators, and I stood in front of teenagers the world had already written off, kids who'd been suspended, expelled, labeled, dismissed, and I told them they could make something beautiful, and they did. God, they did. You should have seen what those kids could create when someone just believed in them for 5 minutes. But in my family, that wasn't a career. That was a hobby, a phase, a detour on the way to becoming someone who actually mattered. The favoritism wasn't loud. It was quiet and surgical, the kind that cuts so cleanly you don't notice you're bleeding until you look down. At family dinners, my father would lean toward Lily and discuss acquisition strategies and market projections like they were co-conspirators in something important. I'd sit across the table pushing food around my plate, waiting for someone to ask me about my day. No one ever did. When I won a citywide award for creating an art program that reduced dropout rates at my school, dropout rates, not some abstract thing, actual kids staying in school because of what we built together, I posted it in the family group chat. My mother responded 4 hours later with a thumbs-up emoji. 1 thumb. That was it. That was all my achievement was worth to her. A single digital thumb. Meanwhile, when Lily got named one of the city's rising business stars, my mother threw a party. Catered, flowers on every table, a guest list that read like a who's who of Manhattan society. I stood in the corner that night holding a glass of wine I didn't want, watching my parents beam at my sister like she was the sun. And I thought, when was the last time they looked at me like that? The answer was never. The answer had always been never. I remember the exact night I understood, not just suspected, not just felt, but understood in my bones, that my parents were embarrassed by me. I'd organized an art exhibition for my students at a small gallery in the Bronx. These kids had poured their hearts onto those canvases. One girl, Destiny, who was 15 and had been in foster care since she was 7, painted a self-portrait that made me cry the first time I saw it. I wanted my parents to see it. I wanted them to see what I did, what it meant, why it mattered. I sent the invitation a month early, plenty of notice, no excuses. My father texted me the morning of the event. Sorry, sweetheart. Important business dinner tonight. Can't reschedule. My mother didn't respond at all. That evening, while I was hanging Destiny's painting on the gallery wall and helping a nervous 16-year-old boy straighten his tie for the first time in his life, I made the mistake of checking Instagram. There was Lily, gorgeous, glowing Lily, standing between my parents at the grand opening of one of my father's new luxury buildings, my mother's arm around her, my father's proud hand on her shoulder. #family first. I drove home alone that night with a box of leftover cheese cubes and crackers in the passenger seat, the car smelling like cheap wine and acrylic paint. And somewhere on the BQE, with the city lights blurring through tears I refused to let fall, I asked myself the question that had been building for years. How many times can you be invisible before you start to disappear? Lily wasn't cruel, I'll give her that. She wasn't blind either. She'd text me sometimes, little messages that were supposed to feel like solidarity but landed like Band-Aids on a bullet wound. I know they're hard on you. Or, don't take Dad's words to heart. But she never, not once, in 8 years, stood up at that dinner table and said, "Hey, what Carol does matters too." She never redirected a conversation toward me, never challenged my father's dismissiveness. She chose comfort over courage every single time, and she told herself that silence was the same as kindness. It wasn't. 5 days before her engagement party, she texted me at 11:30 at night. "Please don't cause any trouble on Saturday. Dad is already in a bad mood about Jake." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm sorry they treat you this way." Not, "I wish things were different. Just, don't mess this up for me." I stared at that text for a long time. Then I typed back, "I have no intention of making a scene." And I meant it. I really did. But the universe, it turns out, had other plans. I met Jake on a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of day where the air smells like rain, even though it hasn't started yet. My car had been making this awful grinding noise for a week, the kind you turn the radio up to ignore until you can't anymore. I pulled into a small auto repair shop on a side street in Brooklyn, not one of those flashy places with a waiting lounge and a cappuccino machine, just a clean, honest shop with a hand-painted sign and a bell on the door. He came out from under a car on one of those rolling boards, wiping his hands on a rag that was already beyond saving. Overalls smudged with grease, work boots scuffed to the point of no return, and these eyes, dark brown, steady, warm, the kind of eyes that make you feel like whatever you're about to say, he's actually going to listen. I told him about the grinding noise. He asked me 3 questions, popped the hood, and explained the problem in a way that didn't make me feel stupid. You know how rare that is? Most mechanics talk to women like we're inconveniencing them by existing. Jake talked to me like I was a person who deserved to understand what was happening with her own car. I don't know how it happened, but an hour later we were sitting on a bench outside the shop, drinking coffee from a bodega down the street, talking about everything: the city, the environment, electric cars, what we wanted out of life. He told me he grew up in a working-class neighborhood in Queens. His father was a mechanic, his grandfather was a mechanic, and he'd known since he was 12 that he wanted to work with his hands. Not because he couldn't do anything else, because he loved it. There's a difference, and Jake understood that difference in a way my family never could. On our 3rd date, a walk across the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset, which sounds cliché but was actually perfect, he told me something I'll never forget. He said, "I don't own a suit, and I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not just to make other people comfortable." And the way he said it wasn't defensive or angry. It was just settled. Like a man who had made peace with exactly who he was. I nearly cried right there on the bridge because I'd spent my entire life trying to earn that kind of peace, and here he was, just living in it. Jake didn't care about my family's money, he didn't care about my father's buildings or my mother's charity boards or my sister's corner office. He cared about whether I'd eaten lunch, he cared about the kid in my 4th period class who finally finished his first painting, he cared about the way I laughed when I was actually happy versus the way I laughed when I was performing. He saw me, the real me, and he didn't look away. My parents, predictably, were horrified. They'd never met Jake and already decided he was beneath us. My father, a man who once lost $2 million on a development deal gone sideways, looked at Jake's calloused hands and saw failure. My mother, who spent more on a single handbag than Jake's monthly rent, smiled her thin, polished smile and said, "Carol, dear, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but are you sure you're not limiting yourself?" Limiting myself. As if loving someone kind and genuine and real was a form of self-sabotage. As if the only acceptable love was the kind that looked good on a Christmas card. The one time they actually sat in the same room with Jake, my father asked him, mid-dinner, between bites of his $40 entree, if he had any plans to pursue something more stable. Jake, to his credit, didn't flinch. He just said, "My work is very stable, sir. I enjoy what I do." My father exchanged a look with my mother. That look, the one that says, "See what I mean?" And the subject was changed to Lily's latest business triumph. What none of them knew, what I knew and kept to myself because it was Jake's story to tell, not mine, was that Jake wasn't just a mechanic who fixed cars in a small Brooklyn shop. He was the founder and owner of Thompson Auto Group, a chain of auto repair shops that stretched across 3 states. He'd built it from nothing. 1 shop became 2, 2 became 5, 5 became 12. His business was known for fair pricing, exceptional service, and a commitment to hiring locally. He'd created jobs in neighborhoods that corporate America had forgotten about. He'd partnered with city infrastructure projects, he'd donated more money to community programs than my mother's entire charity board raised in a year. But here's the thing about Jake. He didn't wear his success on his sleeve. He didn't drive a flashy car or carry a business card with gold lettering. He drove an old pickup truck with a dent in the passenger door because it still ran fine and he'd fixed that engine himself. He wore work boots because he still spent mornings in the shop, under the hood, doing the work he loved. His wealth wasn't a performance. It was just a quiet fact, like his shoe size or his blood type, something that existed but didn't define him. And my family? They never bothered to find out. They took one look at the grease under his fingernails and stamped him with a verdict. Not good enough. 18 months. That's how long they treated him like a ghost. 18 months of backhanded comments and exclusion and seating us by the kitchen door at family events. 18 months of my father calling him the mechanic, like it was a slur, and my mother suggesting, gently, always gently, that I could do better. So there we were, back on that rooftop. The jazz trio had stopped playing. Every pair of eyes on that terrace was locked on our table. And Lily's future father-in-law, Mr. Thompson, a man my father had been trying to close a major real estate deal with for months, was standing up, staring at my boyfriend like he'd just discovered buried treasure. "Wait, that's you?" Mr. Thompson said, loud enough for the entire party to hear, and just like that, the curtain came down. Mr. Thompson turned to the room, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was done staying quiet. "This is Jake, the man behind Thompson Auto Group. His company has supported countless local businesses during downturns. He's been one of the biggest contributors to the city's infrastructure development. I've known his work for years." I watched my father's face drain of color, not pink to white, I mean drain, like someone had pulled a plug. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Lily gripped her champagne glass so hard her knuckles went bone white. Jake stood up slowly, not dramatically, not with anger, just upright, calm, like a man who had nothing to prove and was tired of being treated like he should. "Mr. Henry," he said, and his voice was so steady it made the silence around him feel louder. "I didn't come here tonight to talk about my business. I came here for Carol. For 18 months, your family has treated me like I don't belong in the same room as you. You never once asked me what I do. You never once asked me who I am. You looked at my hands and decided you knew everything you needed to know." He paused. Not for effect. Jake wasn't that kind of man, but because what he said next mattered to him. "Do you know why Carol never talks about herself around you? Because every single time she tries, you make her feel like her life is worthless. She walks into a classroom every day and fights for kids that the rest of the world has given up on. She spends her own money you've mocked for being small, on supplies so those kids can create something beautiful. And she does it with more heart and more courage than anyone I've ever known." His voice cracked, just barely. "And you call her a failure." The terrace was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. My mother was crying. Lily wouldn't look at me. And my father, the great Henry, the deal-maker, the man who always had a response, stood there with his mouth open and nothing coming out. Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. He straightened his jacket and looked directly at my father. "If my son marries into this family, he'll be joining a family that humiliates its own. I came here tonight expecting to celebrate something good. Instead, I watched a father belittle his own daughter in front of 100 people." He shook his head. "I need to think about what that means." The weight of those words landed on the room like a hammer. And then it was my turn. I stood up from that table slowly. Not because I was savoring the moment. I wasn't. This wasn't revenge, and it didn't taste sweet. It tasted like 8 years of swallowed words finally rising to the surface, and if I'm being honest, I was shaking. My hands, my knees, the space behind my ribs, all of it trembling with something that wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. The terrible, blinding kind. I looked at my father. Not the version of him that other people saw. The confident developer. The man who shook hands like he was doing you a favor. I looked at the version of him that only I knew. The one who could make his own daughter feel like a stranger with a single sentence. The one who measured love in profit margins and job titles. "You meant every word you've ever said about me," I told him. My voice was quiet, but it carried. Funny how silence does that, gives your words more room to land. You've spent years making it perfectly clear that Lily is the daughter you're proud of, and I'm the one you wish had turned out differently. I used to think if I just worked harder, loved harder, showed up more, maybe you'd finally see me. But you were never not seeing me, Dad. You saw me just fine. You just didn't like what you saw. My mother had mascara running down both cheeks. She looked like a woman watching her own house burn down and realizing she was the one who lit the match. Lily, beautiful, successful, golden Lily, sat frozen with her eyes fixed on the table, her engagement ring catching the lantern light like some kind of cruel joke. "I'm not angry anymore," I said. And the strangest part was that I meant it. The anger had burned through me years ago. What was left was something quieter and heavier. Exhaustion. The bone-deep tiredness of someone who has spent a lifetime performing for an audience that never clapped. "I'm just done." Jake picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. didn't say another word, just stood beside me, solid, steady, present, the way he'd been standing beside me for 18 months while my family pretended he didn't exist. I looked around that rooftop one last time, 100 guests staring at us, some with pity, some with secondhand shame, some with that wide-eyed look people get when they realize they've been watching a family fall apart in real time. "We're leaving," I said. Nobody stopped us, not a single person. My father didn't call my name. My mother didn't reach for my hand. Lily didn't chase me to the elevator. 100 people on that terrace and not one of them moved. That silence told me everything I needed to know. The elevator doors closed and the noise disappeared. Jake and I stood side by side, not touching, not talking. The silence between us wasn't awkward or empty. It was clean, like the air after a thunderstorm, charged and fresh and new. When we stepped out into the night, the city hit me all at once. Car horns and distant sirens and the smell of rain on warm pavement. Jake turned to me under a streetlight, his face half in shadow. "Are you okay?" I almost laughed. Such a simple question. Such an impossible answer. "No," I said. "But for the first time in my life, I think I'm free." He took my hand. We walked. And I didn't look back. 3 days later, Lily called. Her voice sounded like it had been crying for 72 hours straight, which it probably had. Tom wanted to postpone the wedding. Mr. Thompson had told his son he needed to think carefully about marrying into a family that treats its own that way. On top of that, Mr. Thompson had pulled out of a major real estate deal with my father, a deal worth millions. And when word got around, other investors started backing away too. My mother, meanwhile, had been quietly removed from her position on a local arts board. The empire was cracking, not crumbling, not yet, but cracking in places that couldn't be hidden with a fresh coat of paint. I sat at my kitchen table and listened to Lily cry, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not satisfaction, not vindication. Sadness. Deep, heavy sadness for a family that had every advantage in the world and still couldn't figure out how to love each other properly. 2 days after that, my mother called. Her voice was careful, the way you speak when you know you've lost the right to be casual. "Carol, your father and I want to talk." I let the words hang for a moment. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want to talk because you finally understand what you did? Or because you're living with the consequences?" She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she exhaled, this long, shaky breath that sounded like something breaking open inside her, and said, "Both." Fair enough. I went to their house the next afternoon. The brownstone looked the same. Immaculate, expensive, perfectly maintained, but when I walked into the living room, everything felt different. Smaller. My father was sitting in his armchair, but the man in it wasn't the Henry I knew. He looked older, deflated, like someone had let the air out of his certainty. My mother sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap, no jewelry, no makeup, stripped down in a way I'd never seen before. Lily was on the couch, her eyes swollen and red. My father started to apologize. I held up my hand. "Before you say anything, I need you to understand something. You didn't just overlook me. You made me feel like I was less. Every dinner where you talked to Lily about business and pretended I wasn't there. Every milestone of mine you ignored. Every time you called Jake the mechanic, like it was something to be ashamed of. That wasn't just neglect. That was a choice. You chose over and over again to make me feel small, and I need you to sit with that before you try to make it better." The conversation lasted 4 hours. It was ugly and raw and necessary. My father said he pushed me because he believed I could achieve more, as if love was a motivational seminar. I told him that respect tied to achievement isn't love, it's a transaction. My mother admitted she thought giving Lily more attention would light a competitive fire in me. I asked her when she'd ever stopped to consider that I didn't want to compete. I just wanted to be seen, for who I actually was, not who she wished I'd become. And Lily, my silent, careful, peacekeeping sister, finally cracked open. She told me she'd always known it was wrong. She said she'd lie awake some nights feeling guilty, but convince herself that staying quiet was the safest option. "I thought if I didn't rock the boat everyone would be okay," she whispered. I looked at her and said, Everyone wasn't okay, Lily. I wasn't okay, and your silence wasn't neutral. It was a side. You just never had to admit which one. She broke down after that. Really broke down. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and old and unresolved. At the end of it, when the light outside had gone amber and the coffee had gone cold, I told them my terms. Simple, non-negotiable. If you want a relationship with me, a real one, we go to family therapy. All of us. We sit in a room with someone who can help us untangle this, and we do the work, not for appearances, not to check a box, because you actually want to know your daughter. My father nodded. My mother whispered, yes. Lily reached across the couch and squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel hollow. I drove home that evening through streets I'd driven 1,000 times before, but everything looked slightly different. The way things do when you finally said the truth out loud and the world didn't end. Was everything fixed? No, not by a long shot. You don't undo 8 years of damage in one afternoon. There would be hard conversations ahead, awkward silences, setbacks, moments where old patterns would try to creep back in. I knew that. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I wasn't hoping to be seen. I already was.